Hello, my name is Brenda Price. I'm the Associate State Director for Outreach at AARP Michigan. I'm glad you're here with us today. We have a wonderful presentation about writing winning resumes. Just a few housekeeping items first. We want you to ask questions, so please put your questions in the comment section on your Facebook page, and we will be able to retrieve those questions and answer them. Today, our topic again is winning resumes. We have a wonderful guest speaker today, an expert in her field, Dr. Mary McDougall. Dr. McDougall is the Director of Operation ABLE of Michigan, a division of Spectrum Human Services. She has been the Operation ABLE Director for 14 years. Dr. McDougall has degrees in counseling, certificates in aging from Wayne State University. She's a licensed counselor. She has over 40 years of experience in the workforce field. This is the expert that you want to talk to about writing the best resume. Her specialty is career development for special groups, especially mid-career and older adults. So before we get started with Dr. McDougall, I want to remind you that please write your questions in the comment section, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. I'll turn it over to Dr. McDougall.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today to talk about winning resumes. Resume writing is a challenge for most people. It's a matter of trying to get all of the things you've done down on paper and worded in a way that is going to be successful for you. So we're going to talk about some ways to do that. A couple of things that you should know about your resume is, what is its purpose? Why are you going to all this bother to do this and create this wonderful document? Well, its main purpose is to get you an interview. And in order to do that, you have to be able to create connections with that employer and with that job. And so a good resume is going to help you build those connections and raise the interest of the employer to want to know more. So you're not going to have everything about you in that resume, but you're going to have enough that the employer says, wow, we want to talk to this person. We think this person might be a fit for this job or for our company in general. And so let's set up an interview with them. The other thing that a resume can do is it can open some other possibilities. Sometimes an employer looks at your resume and they say, wow, I don't think we want this person for this current job, but we've got something coming up in a few weeks that would be even more suited to the background this person has. So we're going to keep that resume on file for that opportunity. So there's a lot of things that your resume can do. And it isn't just about getting you the interview. The other thing that your resume will often do is structure the interview itself, so that when you walk in for the interview and sit down and begin the conversation, the employer may start right with the top of your resume and go through it, asking you questions in each section as they go through. On other times, though, you might go into an interview and wonder at the end of the interview if the interviewer even had read your resume. So, but you want to be ready to answer anything that is on your resume, because they're going to expect you to know it like the back of your hand. Some key differences between resumes today and resumes in the past. Today, we're creating resumes for electronic presentation. You are going to be sending your resume perhaps by email, but more likely you are going to be downloading your resume onto an application that the employer has set up. And so it really isn't about the kind of paper that you have or any of that kind of thing. It's on having the right things that are going to work in an electronic review of your resume. And so the second item we've discussed there is that keywords are essential because when the employer, especially if this is a large employer with a lot of resumes in their database, when they are calling up your resume, they are going to do it through keywords. And so if your keywords that they're looking for are not on your resume, you might get missed even though you're a really good candidate. And so how do you know what those keywords are? Well, one of the ways is to look at job postings in your field. And the words that you keep seeing repeated, those words should be in your resume. If you go online and look at a particular employer and pull up the job description for the job you're applying for or similar jobs, look at what are they talking about in the skills section? What are they talking about in the responsibility section? Make sure that those things that you're seeing frequently are in the keywords somewhere in your resume. The other thing is that today you can't have one resume doing the job for every job you might want to go for. You're going to have to be able to tailor your resume to the jobs you're applying for. Now, if there's two jobs that are really similar, you aren't going to have to do much tailoring. But if maybe you're doing this job as a opportunity in retirement to do a part-time job, and you're open to lots of different things, well, you're going to have a separate interview, or excuse me, a separate resume for each of the jobs you apply for. We also are recommending that most people use a profile or summary as their opening statement instead of an objective. It used to be that you would have an objective, something like to obtain a position as a truck driver. Well, today there's so many different kinds of jobs out there that you want to do more in your opening statement than just list what you want to do. You want to give them a hint about why you're going to be valuable to them. And so you want a little bit more content in your opening statement. And then the other thing throughout your resume, you're going to want to highlight accomplishments, not just responsibilities. And by that, we mean that your resume isn't a job description. Your resume should say why you were good in the job you were in, not just that you filled a certain job title. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through the content sections of the resume. There are some things that have not changed at all from the time resumes started. And one of them is that everything on your resume needs to be truthful and accurate. Do not exaggerate. You're going to put a good light on things, but you're not going to say things that you cannot defend, that are not going to be true of you now. And it may be that there's something that you want to put in your resume that was true 10 years ago, but no longer is. Like, for example, maybe you type 70 words a minute. You haven't taken a typing test in 10 years. Well, you might not want to put that on your resume, because when they test you, if they do, they're going to expect that what you said on your resume is accurate today. The other thing is that you want the best information near the top. Think about when you're thumbing through a magazine article. If you begin reading an article and you're bored in the first paragraph, or it doesn't seem to relate to you in the beginning, you're not going to read the rest of the article. That's true for resumes. When an employer is going through a stack of resumes and they come to a resume that doesn't seem like a fit for the job, they're not going to notice that on page 2 you have some really relevant information, because they're never going to get to page 2, or maybe even to the bottom of page 1. So best things, most relevant things first. And then you want your resume to be easy to read. You want to be able to help the employer sort through and see the key information. So you don't want it to be too crowded. You want it to not be an eye test, so you should have at least an 11-point font that you're using. You want to give some white space to make it a little bit easier to comprehend what's in there. And then, of course, you want to make sure that it's well edited in terms of spelling, in terms of grammar, punctuation, and the general appearance of your resume. In my view, it's always easier to edit somebody else's document than your own. So I kind of make it a practice that everybody should have their resume proofread by somebody other than themselves. And another little tip for your own proofreading is that sometimes you should read the information out loud. If you have a paragraph, slowly read that information. You might find that you have an extra word or that you need some punctuation that wasn't there in order to make it be more clear. So those are the key points that have always been true of resumes. Then there's some issues that have a little bit to do with age. One is, how far back should you go? A lot of times you will hear people, job coach people, say you never go back more than 10 years. Well, that's all well and good for many people. And if you're fairly new in the world of work, most of what you've done that's relevant is in the last 10 years. But let's say you've been retired for 10 years or 8 years. The work that you've done, the accomplishments, the experience that you have is going to be older than 10 years. So you may need to go back farther than that. You may need to find a way to bring that information up front. You do not need to say that it was in 1980. What you're going to do is you are, in some cases, going to list your experience without the dates. You're going to list it perhaps with a number of years you were with a certain company or in a certain job without listing dates. Now, if what you did is truly out of date, then you're not going to list it. For example, I started out my career as an RN. I was in that kind of position for 25 years, but that was a very long time ago. And you would not want me to be working on an intensive care unit or a medical surgical unit today. So I'm not going to talk about all that. I may at some point in a resume, depending on what I was applying for, say a background in healthcare, if just having been in the healthcare system, say, would be an important consideration, say for a job I wanted in an insurance company. So think about how you're going to use your long ago experience. The other thing is, can they tell your age from your resume? Well, if you list the date you graduated from high school, yes, they can. You don't need to list the year you graduated from high school or college. You don't need to list the dates beside all of the more recent, more of the jobs that you've had. So try not to give away exactly how old you are. You do want them to know your experience. That's one of the things you have going for you. And when we talk about, for example, how can age become an asset? Well, one of the ways that age is an asset is in terms of your experience in the world of work. For a lot of employers, what they want to know is, can you relate to customers? Can you get to work on time? Do you know what employers really expect from an employee? So those of you who are 50 and older, who I'm assuming most of you on this call are, you all have that, even if it's from primarily volunteer work. Now you have some work to do to get ready to prepare your resume. And that is, you need to gather all the data you're going to need to put it together. Previous jobs, excuse me, schools and training, and relevant certificates. Now, you are not going to list addresses and phone numbers on your resume, but you are going to need that information eventually. You're going to need it for online applications. So gather it all at the same time. List all of your jobs with the most recent ones first. If there's jobs from way back that you aren't going to include in any way, you don't need to list them, but all of the other jobs. List your schools and your address. You do need the address of your college and your high school, any training programs that you went to. And then relevant certificates. Now, if you worked for a big company, you may have gone to tons of workshops where you got a certificate for one-day workshops. You're not going to include all of those. But key certificates that are really more credentials, that show that you really have a set of skills or a certification that is going to make a difference to the employer. Gather all those. You need to know the name on that certificate. You need of the actual certificate itself, and who gave that certificate out and the date for that. So gather all that and you're ready to get started in writing your resume. So the key things that are on most resumes are, first of all, contact information. That has to be on every resume. Some type of an opening statement, and we'll discuss that in a little more detail in a minute. Your experience section, which is probably the most important section of your resume. The education, every resume needs to have some education, even if you have a limited education. Credentials, those kinds of things that are going to say to the employer, yes, this person really can do what they're saying they're doing. And then if you have military service, of course you want to list that because that can be really valuable to you. Now let's talk about the opener, but before I get right into the opener, I do want to say a word about the identifying information on your resume. That is your name, address, phone number, and email address. Address is no longer a required item on your resume. It's up to you whether you want to include your address or not. In days when most of the correspondence was by mail, it was really essential, but now it is not. Your name needs to be highlighted in some way, larger, bold, centered, whatever, because your name is essentially the title of your resume. Email addresses are vital because that is the way many employers are going to communicate to you. And whatever is the preference of the employer for the method of communication, that is what you want to do when you're communicating with them. So a good email address. Your email address should sound business-like. If it does not, get yourself a new email address to use for business. I think it's a good idea if your name is somewhere in your email address, because then if an employer is sending it to you, they're sure that they're sending it kind of to the right place and the right person. And your phone number. You should be listing a phone number that is a good phone number that employers can reach you at, because they're not going to try more than once or twice. So it needs to also have voicemail attached to it. Now let's get back to the opener. After you have all your identifying information, you're going to start with some kind of a beginning. This is like your opening paragraph. It's a written version kind of tell me about yourself. And so what you want to do is set the stage for the employer thinking, this person might be the person we're looking for. So here's just an example of opening profile for a call center person. Experienced call center professional with reputation for excellent customer service. Recent certification in Microsoft Office. Fluent in English and Spanish. Flexible regarding hours and shift. And skills include problem solving, time management, teamwork, effective listening, and leadership. Now, I read that out to you because there's a few things in here that I wanted to point out. One is you want to talk about experience. And so they opened with that and with the kind of job the person is looking for. But most people who are looking for call center, if you look at job descriptions, you're going to hear them talk about customer service. We do training in call center training, and what employers tell us all the time is give us persons who know how to deal with customers, and we can do most of the rest of it. But they do want computer skills, and so being certified in Microsoft Office could be a real addition. And depending on where you are going to be working, that fluency in English and Spanish could be the difference between you getting an interview and you not. It might not be Spanish that you're fluent in, it could be Arabic. But if it is a language that is common in the population that this call center is serving, you want to be sure to list that if you have that exceptional talent. Flexibility I put in here because for call centers, they want to know people are going to be available in the evening perhaps or on weekends. So if you are flexible, put that in. If the truth is you're not flexible, don't list it in your resume, because if it's there, they're going to expect it to be true. The next sample, there, we can probably look at next. And this one I'm calling a summary, but basically it's the same. Now this is for a very specific field. It is for somebody who, say, graduates from a culinary arts training program, and they're going to want to give the skills that they have. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And so employers want knife skills, they want following standardized recipes, and they want ability to work fast. Those are the key things that you're going to see in almost every job description. That goes in the summary. In that particular field of culinary arts, ServSafe is the certifier of most of the credentials that are important in that field. And so if you have those, you're going to list those. Then there is another way to do your opener, and that is to list some skills in a table or some kind of a format. And often you use a skill list for hands-on type jobs. In this case, somebody who's working in a warehouse might have a opener like this, where they talk about driving a high-low, pulling stock, processing paperwork, those kinds of things that an employer wants. But they are also adding that train new employees, because everybody who works in a warehouse wouldn't have experience or, you know, and be able to do that. So they added that as well. Now we're going to go to the experience section of your resume. And usually with the experience section of your resume, you're going to be talking about employment. But sometimes if you don't have a lot of employment in a job you're trying to get, but you have a lot of volunteer work, that counts too. It really doesn't matter to the next employer whether you were paid or not. It's what can you do? What have you done before that you can do for me? That's what they really want to know. So you're going to provide the name of the company or the organization, the city it was in, and either the number of years you were there or the calendar years you were there, and the job titles. And then under that, you're going to describe in some detail what you did. But remember, it's not a job description, so you don't have to list everything, especially the obvious things you probably did. And you want to put some qualitative information in that listing that helps differentiate you from a standard person that might have been that, because we know you were extraordinary in the job you did, right? So you want to be able to show that. So, or you might just want to show the depth of what you did. So for example, let's say you were an administrative assistant. You might say prepared reports and correspondence for executive team. Or you might want to say prepared a variety of documents using Microsoft 365, because those are things that maybe the employer had mentioned in the job posting. You might also be able to say in this section of your resume any special acknowledgments that you got, like often acknowledged for ability to handle challenging customers, or given responsibility for projects with a time-sensitive deadline, or appointed by director of department to represent department on morale committee for the corporation. Won Employee of the Month award for innovative idea in processing paperwork. Give them a little bit of something that says, I was special. I didn't just go in and do a routine performance. I went in and did an outstanding performance. That's what you really want to show in your resume, especially in this section. And then there's the education section of your resume. You will list high school if you don't have college. If you do have college, you don't need to list high school, because they are going to assume that you have a high school diploma or a GED. And in today's world, really, although there is a difference between a high school diploma and a GED, most employers will consider them interchangeable. If you went to high school, but you did not graduate, still list high school, list the city it was in, Don't say finish ninth grade. Just say Brooksfield High School, Brooksfield, Michigan. That's all you need to say. They'll ask you about it, and on the online application, they will probably ask you if you have a diploma or GED. But you don't need to do that on your actual resume. And then relevant training. If it is related only to the job that you're applying for, then list any kind of training that you have. And in general, everything on your resume is listed with the most recent first and then working backwards. The other things you might want to include on your resume are community activities. Let's say you want to work in a nonprofit organization as a youth worker, and you've trained, you've coached soccer in your school, or you've tutored kids in math, whatever it is where you've worked with kids, list that as a community activity in the community activity section. And always list military service, either as a separate category, or you can list it in your profile. Many employers, especially large employers, are going to give priority to people who are coming as veterans, especially people who have extensive service in their background. Some final thoughts about your resume. There isn't a right way and a wrong, well, there are some wrong ways, but there's not just one right way to do your resume. If you took it to 3 different experts, they're all going to tell you to change this or do something different. And that's good. Get all the input you can. But remember a couple of things. The person who has to really like your resume, most of all, is you, because it represents you. If there is something on your resume that you don't feel good about, don't leave it on your resume, because you may have to talk about that when you go on the job. And if you're not comfortable, it'll show. And you have to feel good. If there's something you really, really want on your resume and people are telling you that maybe you shouldn't put it, well, listen to the advice and sort it out. But if at the end of that, you still feel like it's important and you want it there, it's your resume. It should make you feel good. But the real test is, after you've sent out some resumes, are you getting the interviews? If you're getting the interviews, the resume is doing its job.
Dr. McDougall, those were some wonderful tips.
Well, good.
I especially like the email address clarification, asking people to make sure that their email is straightforward, possibly has their name in it, because that's important. It does demonstrate that you are professional, and it also signals to the person that they are sending to the right person. I thought that was a great tip. Well, we do have some questions for you.
Okay.
Some applications ask your age. Should you include it or avoid it?
Well, my thing is, if they're really asking for your age, usually it will be on a separate document. And it is because maybe that company needs to fill in an EEO report or something. And they will usually say, this is not forwarded to the for the interview. It's not used to screen you out. I would put it on, because they're going to find out eventually anyway. And then it's going to be up to you to show that employer when you get there that you are dynamic, you are energetic, you are an example of somebody that they really need on their staff.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So how does a person explain gaps in their work experience on their resume? Do they simply say, I was raising my children, or I was a caregiver? Should that be on the resume, or is that something the person explained during the interview?
Well, there's a couple ways to do that. Because of the online application process, most of the time, in spite of the fact that you may not have dates on your resume, the online application itself may force you to show gaps that you wouldn't necessarily have to show on your resume. So What I would do in that case is I would definitely list caregiving on my application. I wouldn't necessarily do it on my resume. But in my profile, I might say, returning to the world of work after a period of caregiving elderly parents or something of that kind. In today's world, that is going to become as normal as child caregiving for young people. And so I think that most employers are going to understand that. And they're also going to understand that people are going to be kind of anxious to get back to work and looking forward to get back to work after they've had a period of caregiving.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear that employers are receiving that the gap, particularly when it pertains to caregiving, and it's being largely recognized today.
Yeah, it's more and more because the employers themselves are coping with the same kind of thing usually. And so they understand, and they have a lot of employees
Good.
that are going through that.
Another comment is you talked about putting the best information on top of your resume. The question is, what is the best practice for listing education? Is it at the top or is it at the bottom of the resume?
And that's a really good question. And the answer is it depends. If you are, let's say you just graduated from a training program or from college, and you're looking for a job in that field, then education goes first. If what is most relevant to the job you're applying for is the experience you've had, then the experience goes first. And so you kind of have to look and see, in my own situation, what would be the most impressive thing for the employer to see before they saw, the remainder of what I have in there. The other thing is, a lot of times people have different kinds of experience in their background. And some of it is related to the job they're applying to, and some is not. But maybe the best job they ever had or the longest job that shows the most stability is not in the field. What I would do is I would list related experience and give the related experience. Then I would have another section that says other experience, and I would list that long time job that shows my job stability and all of that.
Okay. Well, it was great that you noted that volunteer work is valuable and should be noted, because at AARP, we have a lot of volunteers doing wonderful work with us.
Yes.
Actually, and many nonprofits today have volunteers who are carrying out strategic programs and events and functions at the organization. So that experience is valuable. It was good to hear you say that.
And I think the big challenge for that is that when the person gets the interview, to make sure that they understand that they've been doing all this volunteer work and now they're excited to get back to work into an employment situation. So, that they can make sure the employer does know that, yes, they do need to work now for pay. And that's what they're really wanting to do.
Do you recommend references on your resume or wait until the employer requests them?
Yes, I don't recommend that you list any references on your resume. You don't even need the statement references available upon request, but you do need to have references readily available. And one of the key things about references, you need to figure out who's going to say the things related to this job, and you need to prepare your references. You need to tell them the kind of a job that you're applying for and what you'd like them to highlight if they get a call from an employer. And I think that step is vital. The other thing is you need to make sure that you have current phone number and current email for the references, because you don't want to frustrate the employer, having them try to get people that maybe the number's changed or that email doesn't work anymore or whatever. You need to do that groundwork and get a good reference list. You'll only need 2 or 3 really solid references, particularly people who can speak about your skills and your work, not necessarily for people who are 50 and older. They've got enough people who really know about their work that they don't have to rely as much on personal references as, say, a young person starting out their career might.
Okay. So just a quick, not a recap, but some points that I heard you say, and you just reminded me of that. You talked earlier about having your information ready when you're getting ready to do an online application or your resume. Those key phone numbers, contacts, addresses for former employers, because they will ask for it. And if you're online, you don't want to get timed out.
Exactly. Very good point to stress, because that can be very frustrating if you get everything on and then, you run out of time. And one of the reasons that people do that is they get partway through and they say, "Oh, I didn't know they were going to need my high school address." That's the other thing people worry about is they worry about listing jobs that are no longer there or companies that are no longer there. That's not a problem. Employers understand that. They know that some businesses are gone today that weren't there. So,
Boy, we're going to probably see more of that given the turn
yes,
of
for
events
sure. Yes,
this year.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, Dr. McDougall, I we really appreciate this information. And I want to say to our audience that if you didn't get a chance to hear this from the beginning, you can always revisit Facebook, because this recording will be posted there. So you can go through it again and again if you need to pull out very specific information that Dr. McDougall has offered. And we want to share again her information on the screen so that you have an opportunity to write down her contact information as you see it there, 313-832-0922, or her email address is there, mcdougall@operationable.org. We really appreciate you providing this series. If you didn't see the first series, she talked about returning to work after age 50, tips for that. And then our next presentation, she's going to talk about interview tips, those interview skills that you will need in order to show off what you got and nail that job. Dr. McDougall, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate
You're welcome. It was
you.
a privilege to be here.